can't believe I remember telling tell me, live and otherwise, that what we needed was a pseudo-armor around the world. Remember that? Whether it impacted our precious freedoms or not. That's what we needed.
So right now in Washington, D.C., there's this thing going on called the Planetary Defense Conference. That is actually what it's called. At the beginning of the conference, NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine said this.
This is not about Hollywood. It's not about movies. This is about ultimately protecting the only planet we know right now to host life.
And scientists there are laser focused on figuring out one thing: how to dodge an asteroid that is currently hurtling directly at Earth. Here's the thing, that asteroid, it's not real. So why are these scientists pretending that it is?
APL and around the world are playing make-believe, but it's for a very real and scary scenario that could come true, a massive asteroid hurtling toward our planet, and they want to be prepared. Imagine an Armageddon-type scenario, like the one that played out in the 1998 science fiction film, where NASA tries to stop a gigantic asteroid on a collision course with Earth.
In case of a real threat.
That's what a group of NASA scientists, engineers, and astronomers from around the world are talking about in Washington, D.C. this week at the 6th Annual Planetary Defense Conference. They want to know what we would do if we knew an asteroid was going to hit Earth in 2027.
Being unprepared would certainly be bad. I mean, the asteroids have the potential to cause a lot of damage.
Aerospace engineer Brent Barbie spoke to us over Skype about the exercise developed by NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena. It describes how a 100 to 300 meter asteroid has a 1% chance of impact in 8 years. These figures show where that fictional asteroid could hit at any point along the red line.
Even if a 1 to 200 meter size asteroid were coming our way and we weren't prepared to deal with it, then we would, as a species, be missing a golden opportunity to prevent what is perhaps one of the only known preventable natural disasters.
APL and around the world are playing make-believe, hurtling toward our planet, and they want to be prepared. Imagine an Armageddon-type scenario, like the one that played out in the 1998 science fiction film.
So this past weekend I did go see Avengers Endgame, and yeah, so spoiler alert, I will be talking about the movie, obviously, if you haven't seen it yet, so proper movie etiquette check. But it was a weird experience watching this movie. The timing of it, just we're only about a week before or so, somebody had emailed me about this planetary impact conference that they were having all that week. So I actually saw it the last day of this conference, where they're talking about the threat of asteroids, and apparently Bill Nye was there talking about how we're not doing enough. We're not taking the threat seriously enough, and this could be like species ending and all that. But he's talking about, like the big one. And then the same week, of course, they're talking about this Apophis. Is that how you say it? Apophis or Apophis. Oh, now it's going to really bug me not knowing how to say that. Which is this asteroid that was supposedly discovered in like 2003, something like that. 2004. They first discovered it supposedly. So this is not a new thing. But of course they're talking about it all past week and doing news reports on it. This potentially really destructive asteroid that is 1,100 feet across, and the last time it was supposedly this is just absurd. The The last time it was supposedly the closest to Earth was in 2014, and they did radar imaging of it, and they were able to readjust their calculations. Because at first, in 2004, they thought it might actually hit the Earth, and then, of course, now they have new information, new data. But I mean, the 9 million... Okay, if any of you are still this whole questioning the space, the idea that they could be faking space, if you still can't look at something like this and realize how ridiculous some of the things they're claiming are. 1,100 feet across. And this is just a rock. It's not emitting any light. 9 million miles away. They say they were able to see it with a telescope and do radar imaging. Now, to try and explain how 9 million miles away, 1,100 feet is like a grain of sand is too big of a comparison to the human eye from like a mile away. So yeah, this is all ridiculous nonsense. But they're hyping it, and then at this conference they did a drill. Somebody had emailed me saying, yeah, they're doing this exercise to practice what we would do in case of an asteroid, right? Which is like, what are they practicing exactly? But really what they're talking about is, what do we do to prevent such a thing? And we have lots of options with a nuclear device. But of course, all the news reports that are talking about it, they're hyping their headlines with this, a giant asteroid named after a god of death will whiz by Earth in 10 years. And so yeah, this is what they're saying, is that they know, they know that in 2029, on Friday the 13th they know the specific day that it's going to come within, like, closer to the Earth than the moon. And it will supposedly be visible to the naked eye as this bright spot of light. But yeah, it's named after the god of death, this Apophis character, supposedly because two of the astronomers who discovered it were fans of Stargate SG-1. And so that's where they came up with the name, from a sci-fi show. But it's the god of death, right? And hopefully, if you know enough about this channel, you understand. I don't even need to explain all the levels that works on. But that's the whole point, is that I'm thinking about all this stuff, this idea, this totally made up nonsense, heavenly object, this whole theme of death from above, and what can we do to stop it? How do we prevent this catastrophe, this Armageddon type scenario? And then I go and see Avengers Endgame. And of course, that's exactly what Avengers, both Infinity War and Endgame, were all about. The most apocalyptic scenario, at least the most unique one that has ever been on the silver screen. The first one ending with the finger snap of Thanos, which coincidentally means death. And that's what he is, right? He's an archetype, as all the heroes and characters and things in those movies. It's just an archetypal smorgasbord of every conceivable kind. So there's a million things you could talk about. But with Thanos, right, it is probably the most chilling representation I've ever seen anywhere of this demiurge concept, this Gnostic idea of a god who is this evil, tyrannical, bloodthirsty, petulant god. He's basically the type of god that Richard Dawkins describes, right, when he shares his perception of the God of the Bible. And the chilling thing about the whole finger snap ending of the first one, right, was that it was this totally devastating event where half the living creatures in the entire universe just vanish. Everything gets eerily quiet, and certain people in the movie just turn to dust and disappear. And the second one picks up at that point, and the crazy thing was, like, the first hour of this movie, for an action movie, there was not a ton of action, especially the first hour, because it was all just these people grieving. It was all about death. I mean, the whole movie is just a treatise on worldly approaches to grappling with the issue of death, the specter of death. Basically have this post-apocalyptic scenario of everyone who's just in mourning, even though the earth and the environment are fine, and there's still billions of people on the planet, and they're all mourning. They're all grieving these people who are gone, and so it's this whole shadow of the finality of death, not just the scary moment of people dying, but long, long after, where they're just separated from you forever, and it's this whole oppressive notion of the permanence of death and letting go and moving on and grappling with those things that all human beings grapple with. So then, of course, the whole movie is them trying to figure out a way to go and undo what Thanos did, and sure enough, the way to do that, go back in time, is using the quantum realm and going through a quantum portal, shortcut through the quantum realm, and there you go. You don't need the time stone if you got the quantum realm. And they fight in all the different archetypes of patriotism and transhumanism and witchcraft and all enhanced persons, you know, all team up from all over the world and face Thanos and destroy him. But then they also wove in a deeper layer where there's characters who are gone, who died before the finger snap, who are still gone. And so it kind of leaves that just hanging there, because they spend a lot of time with their quantum realm time travel escapades. Tony Stark sees his dad, and Thor sees his mom, and they're all gone. You know, they weren't finger snapped by Thanos, so it's the foreboding reality of death. But then it's like, well, how permanent is death? If you can go back in time and undo things, or open up realms and use technology to undo things, and if we can go back and undo the injustice of death, well then, is anyone really gone? Which is funny, because that reminds you of another Disney franchise theme that's coming out.
No one's ever really gone.
I'm not going to get off on that tangent, but just the whole experience of watching this movie was pretty surreal. Like, in context of everything that I was talking about with the asteroids and everything, because you're going, all this little quote-unquote data that they put out and these conferences and announcements from NASA and stuff that's so dry and boring and sparse and ridiculous, and everyone believes that that's real, but doesn't really grab anyone's attention. It's not, it's really just this abstract idea. And then versus sitting there in a theater where you're immersed in all the sound and the visuals and the story and these huge epic battles and powers and just the whole crazy experience of going to a movie like that. And you know, we talk so much about like the alien invasion scenario, right? The fake alien invasion. And I'm sitting there going, millions and millions of people are watching this movie where aliens are just kind of now commonplace. You know, I was thinking about that too. You know, in the 70s and 80s, there was all these alien movies, but they were all about, are we alone? Are they out there? E.T., Close Encounters, First Contact, all these kind of introducing the idea, what if? And then fast forward to today, and well, of course there's aliens, and now it's all normal, and even the Hulk can walk around, you know, with his glasses on, and he's just a normal, taking selfies with kids. Totally reminded me of that Jordan Peterson clip where he talks about being a civilized monster. Never mind. I'm sitting there watching this movie going, what fake alien invasion scenario could they do that could even compete with this? And just that whole interplay between things people imagine and believe because of what they've seen in TV and movies, and then the things that we believe based on what NASA and other agencies say. I mean, even in that news clip, right, they're like, imagine an Armageddon-like scenario, like the one in the 1998 science fiction movie. And they do that a lot. More often than you realize, appealing to Hollywood so people can imagine what we're talking about, right? So they can visualize it. But the people watching Avengers know it's not real. And then the people watching the news and listening to NASA who believe it, you know, believe it is real. So how much of this great deception really is being perpetrated by not just NASA and the government and everything, but by this never-ending saga of imagination and fantasy being used on so many levels? And this is weird too. Like the same week, I got into this weird conversation with someone about fire and brimstone. They made some weird joke about fire and brimstone, and I was kind of bothered by it. Like, why are you joking about fire and brimstone? Like the judgment of God. And literally, when you look at asteroids and the things they depict in that 1998 science fiction movie, if fire and brimstone were really falling from the sky and crashing into Earth, and certain things described in the book of Revelation were happening, really, and buildings were really blowing up, and it was just pandemonium in the streets and everything. You know, it's asteroids. It's not God, right? It's not judgment. And what do we do to stop it? How do we stop this judgment? How do we assemble all of our collective powers and knowledge and interdimensional alliances to fight off this existential threat? This idea of a being whose most violent act is not with any kind of weapon or bomb, but by snapping his fingers like God. And people just can turn to dust and be no more. That's the most horrific Armageddon scenario. Meeting a godlike being. And then, of course, in Endgame, once they've gone through the quantum realm and come back and gotten all the stones that give you that godlike power, right? Because no one has it intrinsically, it's just the universe. That's the other distinction of the demiurge concept versus the true biblical concept. When they confront Thanos the second time, he realizes he made a mistake by leaving half the people alive because they don't appreciate and they don't understand his sovereign wisdom. They don't understand. I mean, there's so many things he says that are just totally digs at the biblical God. Like, I am inevitable. I'm inevitability, or whatever he says. Like, no matter what you do, you can't stop me. You can't oppose me. Which, of course, is what the God of the Bible says. But when they confront him the second time, he decides that he's just going to wipe everything out and start over and create a whole new universe. Which is, even more horrific than the original finger snap. So when Thanos dies, this is the message that they're portraying, which is completely Luciferian. It's so Antichrist, this whole movie. Everything in the movies is so Antichrist. And we eat it up like science, and we eat it up as entertainment, and so many other things. But then they just leave the question of death, the finality of death, kind of open. Because some people are still mourning by the end of the movie. They still didn't get their friends or family back. They're still longing for the people who are on the other side, who have passed beyond death. But when you've removed any notion of a eternal, omniscient, omnipresent God from the equation and just bring it back to, well, it's a problem that we can address for ourselves. We can grapple with it, and the MCU the MCU is going to keep going forward, and they're going to make more movies, and they've passed the torch with Iron Man and Cap and Star Wars. They're going to keep making movies, and it just never ends. And so it was kind of good in that sense too, to watch this movie, having seen most of these build-up movies since the first Iron Man came out and been following along more or less. And of course I read the comics growing up as a kid and was familiar with all these characters, and seeing them come to life on the big screen, was interesting. But it was kind of a finale for me too, in a way that, like, okay, finally I can just, it's a good point to just stop paying attention to all this nonsense, because it's what it really is. It's worse than if it was just nonsense and just harmless entertainment and harmless fun. Then that would be one thing. But the messaging, the symbolism, and the level of indoctrination that is going on is about as serious as it gets. I mean, really. And when you see just kind of Hollywood and science, quote unquote, all bleeding together all the time. We named it after Stargate SG-1. I mean, it's surreal. It's insane. But hopefully you guys can see the connections and kind of ponder these things. I'm sure a lot of you saw the movie, and how, it was all about death and defeating this idea of a God of death, because people don't want to associate God with judgment, or the finality of judgment, the finality of separation. I mean, this movie, that's what blew me away, is it was all about the separation, that they're gone. This terrifying idea that there's no bringing them back. That's what they all refuse to believe. But the Bible tells us that there is a finality of judgment. And because Jesus conquered death, that's why the good news is the good news. And he didn't use time stones, or the quantum realm, or gauntlets, or technology, or anything like that. The horrifying prospect of death and the finality of death was defeated at the cross. And when he comes back a second time, it will be death from above. It's what the Bible says. It's fire and brimstone, and bowls being poured out, and plagues, and calamities, and natural disasters, quote-unquote natural disasters. There's just too many things to point out. It's surreal stuff. Thank God we have the truth of His Word to keep us sane in these insane times. God bless.